Hello and welcome to a new episode of Las Platicas. Here we are, Comadres y Comics. Who is in studio Zoom with us today, Kristen?
Studio Zoom. Yes, that sounds like a cool 1970s club where they did disco. Yes, like Sarah said, welcome. This is Las Platicas, which is a show hosted by Comadres y Comics. And we are here today in Zoom studio with Julio Anta. He is a writer based in New York City. Hello, Julio. He's raised in Miami. I have to tell you, I've always wanted to go there. Like the nightlife just seems like it's on fire. He's raised in a Cuban and Colombian family. And his writing focuses on the intersection of the Latinx identity and American life. Debut comic, which we're so excited to hear all about and talk all about, is the comic book series Home. And its first issue released on April 14th, published by Image Comics, and will be followed by Frontera, a YA graphic novel published by HarperCollins in 2023. In addition to writing, he also runs The Native Sound, a DIY record label. Welcome, Julio.
Hey,
I'm
thanks
going
for
to show my
having
copy
me.
because I have the variant cover.
Yep.
Jen, where's
Got it
yours?
right here.
There we go.
I ain't slacking.
Thanks for
Yes.
picking it up, everyone.
Yes, it is. It was one of the most anticipated single issues for our podcast. When we heard about it, we talked about it when it came out. I mean, Sarah was quick to say, put it on my pool. And so when it came out, we were just super excited to read it. So we are equally excited to have you here today. So welcome. And just to get everything started, I want to just jump right into it. And I want to have you just kind of share with us what your quote unquote origin story is of how you entered into the comics industry. So just introduce yourself a little bit about talking about your history with comics and then how you began your comics career.
Yeah, so my history with comics kind of derives from anime. And being a kid that was really obsessed with anime, my uncle would bring me Dragon Ball Z VHSs from Colombia that were way
That is super awesome.
way ahead of where we were in the US version on like Cartoon Network.
Yeah, because they recorded it in Spanish first before they recorded it in English. And actually I've been to Anime Expo a lot. Fun fact about that is that they actually had to base off of the Spanish dub because they could not get their hands on the translations fast enough, so they translated it from the Spanish speaking anime first. Yeah, it's super
interesting.
And fun fact, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we love Dragon Ball. We love Dragon Ball. So my brother, he picked it up in Mexico when he went to visit my grandmother for the summers. And then after that, he had my uncle record it on VHS and they would ship it to him. So we had it in Spanish before it even ever hit in English. So that's,
wow.
So like, I feel that.
Yeah.
Sorry, go
Yeah, it's so interesting. I did read an article once about how anime hit big in South America way before it did here. And I don't remember all the details, but it's so interesting to me because usually, it's the opposite. Usually things come here and then, go elsewhere. But yeah, so I started I was super into Dragon Ball Z through those VHSs that he would bring over whenever he'd come and visit. And then through that, I back in Miami, a friend of mine told me about this anime store. And this is, I'm 30 now, so I must have been like 10 or 12. So this was like 2000, 2002. And I don't know that there were many anime stores around back then, especially not in Miami. But it was this store called Anime Hurricane, and they sold like fan subs of, like Japanese, like the Japanese audio, and then just subtitled by like the guy who worked at the store.
Yep, that's
the
real.
real old school.
Yes.
Yeah. It was Miami Mike. If anybody wants to Google Miami Mike, there's a whole like
That's
urban legend about who
hilarious.
this guy is. But so I went there for the first time, and they had American comics also. And like I knew comics from like, you know, the pharmacy, like Spinner Rack, like Archie and Sonic when Archie did Sonic the Hedgehog comics, and like some Marvel stuff. But going to the store, Anime Hurricane, was my first exposure to like a comic book store and like the wall and like the new releases. And that was, I remember the first comic that I picked up there was Civil War #1, I think. And that was the first time, because I'd been going to the store for years and like I'd see the American comics, but for me it was all like anime, manga. And then I remember picking up Civil War #1 and being super into it. And that event kind of like got me into American comics for the first time. And then I just kind of stayed into it, you know, through, you know, adulthood. A lot less manga and anime now. Now it's more like the kinds of things that I'm into are a lot of like image books and graphic novels. Not so much really like the big two. But, you know, like obviously as a Latino living in Miami, living in this country, you know, I didn't grow up seeing myself in a lot of media, you know, with the exception of like Telemundo, Univision, that like I'd watch with my parents, my grandparents. Like with American media, I never really saw myself, and that extended to comics as well. And so when I had the idea to start writing comics, I knew that that was something that I wanted to contribute to. You know, obviously there's Latino creators, Latino characters doing a lot of like hard work to push into that medium. So I wanted to kind of follow in those footsteps and do my own comics that focused on, you know, our stories and characters that look like me and look like, you know, the vast, diverse Latinidad, you know. So that's pretty much how I decided to start writing comics.
That is super awesome. Did your parents ever say like, what do you mean you want to draw comics?
Yeah. Well, you know, you know, it's funny, on Twitter, like a few weeks ago, there was this thing going around about that Scholastic book, How to Draw a Manga. It was like this viral thing where everybody was like drawing their own version of the cover. And it reminded me that like I got that at like a Scholastic book fair when I was a kid. And I always wanted to be like a manga artist, not really knowing that like, you know, like Americans aren't really manga artists, you know? But like me and my friends, we would just draw, like we would, you know, early as the internet, we would be on AOL and we would print out like Dragon Ball Z, you know, like images that are from like future seasons that we weren't aware of yet. And we'd practice drawing, you know, all of those characters. So I always wanted to be an artist. And I kind of like, as I got older, I like slowly started realizing like, I'm not going to be an artist. Like, it's just not, you know, like my skills aren't like continuing to develop. So, you know, I mean, as you guys know, Home is my first series. So, and I mentioned I'm 30, so like writing comics is like you know, this has been like the last couple of years. So it's something that, you know, home is really what got me to want to start writing comics, because I had the idea for this story. And then I was like, okay, now how do I write a comic? Like, I don't know how to do this. And I started doing a lot of research to learn how to do it. I bought this book that Brian Michael Bendis put out that is about comic book writing, started reading a lot of scripts online. And kind of like getting into that like Twitter community of comic book creators, and like learning like how to get started and everything. But you know, so it wasn't really that moment with my parents of like, what do you mean you want to be like you want to do comics? It was more like, all right, I'm an adult, like I have a stable like job. I want to make comics. you know, and see what happens. So
that is
yeah, a
super
little bit
awesome.
different.
That is really great. Tell us more about the book
Yes.
and how did you develop the story for Home?
Yeah. So obviously we all know, most people living in this country know, in early 2018, we all found out about family separation. And as you guys mentioned, I mentioned earlier, I'm from Miami. My father was a Cuban refugee as a child. He came to the US when he was 3 years old in the late 50s. My mother's side of the family, my mother was born in the US, but her parents were undocumented from Colombia. So and growing up in Miami, you know, I'm surrounded by, you know, all people who are immigrating from all over, you know, Latin America, the Caribbean. So all sorts of different like immigration stories that I'm being surrounded with. Um, and it wasn't something that I necessarily thought a lot about, because it was just like, that was growing up in Miami, like that is the dominant culture, you know? Um, and like I've told this story before, but like it wasn't until I left Miami for the first time that I experienced like interpersonal like racism from like one individual saying something racist to me. You know, like that's just not something that I personally experienced in, you know, a minority majority city like Miami. So when I moved to New York, it was kind of like this culture shock, and kind of like led me to start, you know, I don't know if the right word is like embracing my culture more, but focusing on it more and thinking about it more, because it wasn't something that I necessarily thought about growing up in Miami. You know, everybody that one of the first questions that we would ask each other when like you'd meet a new friend in school was, where are you from? You know, and it wasn't in like the way that we get asked, where are you from? You know, it was like, oh, nice to meet you. So where are you from? Like, where's your family from? And it was Venezuela, Colombia, mostly Cuba, because it's Miami, but like almost everybody, you know, either they or their parents came from somewhere else. Um, so, you know, early 2018, we're already a couple of years into the Trump administration. And I'm like already living in this like perpetual rage, you know, every day hearing every single new thing, you know, being angry that we're in this place in the beginning, you know, in this situation to begin with. And then when we all started finding out about family separation a few months after it had already started, I was just like, you know, like destroyed by it. You know, I'd see these kids and these images and videos, and I saw my father, who was a Cuban refugee, in those kids. I saw my own son, because I was a new father at the time. My son was 3 years old, and like I I just like, it was, I've obviously I've grown up in this, you know, these immigrant communities, heard all sorts of stories, kind of had this cynical worldview of how this country treats immigrants. But seeing family separation was like a step even further than I guess had ever even imagined. So, you know, my personality, like being what it is, with like, you know, obsessively like getting into comics or getting into like collecting records or whatever, I kind of became obsessed with like reading every article and watching every video, every interview that was about family separation. And in hindsight, I think it was kind of like this kind of strange way of coping with it, you know, kind of like diving into it and wanting to like figure out everything that was happening, why it had started, like what was the groundwork for how we got there. Um, and eventually I had the idea for this comic, you know, and it felt like a positive way to, you know, channel these feelings that I was having about, you know, being a Latino in America, being the child of immigrants, and seeing what now as an adult, the way that the country has just escalated the way that it's treating immigrants. So that's pretty much how it started. And I guess part of that also is the conversation that we were having before about not seeing myself in media. And when I did see myself, it was these negative, stereotypical portrayals of what, the average white American sees a Latino as. So part of that was, finding a way for me to tell a positive story, about people like us and what, not deal with these stereotypes and not even focus on the politics of family separation, but focus on how it affects one family in particular.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Wonderfully said. And you've kind of answered a question that I was going to ask about, the research and stuff like that. But can you tell us a little bit more about like how, I know you said that you used it kind of like to help cope with all that was going on, and I know I did some of that too as well, but did you feel any like mental strain at all as you were researching this stuff as well, to like, and realizing just all the horrible things that were happening, and kind of like how did you process that besides just like making home? And did you discover anything that was particularly surprising or shocking to you as you were doing this research?
Yeah, I mean, it was really difficult. It was, like I mentioned before, I was kind of doing a lot of the research before I had the idea for the book and before I decided to write home. And, I have one memory in particular. I was listening to a podcast of an interview with the mother of one of these kids. And I was waiting for the train on my commute to work. And I'm listening to her. It's a phone call between her and her son because they finally found out where her son was. I believe they had presented themselves in Arizona. And I guess this answers the question about like one of the surprising things that I learned was that they weren't just being separated and like put into another facility, nearby or anything like that. They were being shipped. These kids were being shipped all over the country. And in this particular interview that I was listening to, the mom had finally figured out, with the help of a nonprofit, where her son was. And this was like right in the beginning of family separation. So, it was, the whole thing was chaotic, but it was even more chaotic at the time because nobody knew what the length of what was actually happening yet. And she found out that her son was in the Bronx here in New York. That he'd been put on a plane and sent to a foster, not home, but like facility in the Bronx. So from Arizona all the way to New York. And that was something that was pretty like shocking to me, that we would, like family separation, obviously horrible, but then to just ship kids like all over the country was just insane to me. And listening to her, crying and telling her son that she's sorry forever bringing him, because if she knew that this would happen, she would have never done it. And I think that's really like one of the biggest tragedies of family separation, is that it was just sprung on people from one minute to another. It wasn't, the purpose of it, if you just take the administration at their word, which I think is the truth, it was deterrence. They wanted to use their cruelty to show anybody else around the world, because it's not just South America. A lot of people don't realize that, there's a lot of African immigrants who go to South America to then claim asylum. It was a message to the entire world that if you come here, we're going to be as cruel as we possibly can. So don't do it. So I think that was one of the tragedies too, is that it wasn't just deterrence, it was also the cruelty of starting this program from one day to another without any form of announcement. Because we can all criticize the fact that, we can all criticize them potentially saying like, hey, starting on this date at the end of the week, if you come here, we're going to separate your kid from you. And that would be horrible. But just doing it without giving anybody any warnings. And that's kind of what I wanted to infuse into the book, was that, a lot of these people, depending on where they're coming from, this is a month, longer than a month-long journey, and they're not necessarily, following the news, knowing exactly, what policies are changing at the border, because immigration policies are mostly very discretional depending on the executive branch and who's the president at the moment. And that's why, you see changes with ICE, for example, where, Obama, at least what he was saying was we would only go after people with criminal records, whereas when Trump got in, it was going after anybody who was undocumented. So like with these executive, these laws that are so tied to the executive branch, they were able to just spring it from one day to another. It wasn't passing a new law or anything like that. And people like Juan and Mercedes from the book were just showing up, claiming asylum the way that they should do, as, it's a legal process.
The way they've been told to do.
Just,
Mm-hmm.
exactly, because, people can have a debate about, crossing illegally, and obviously I'll have a million reasons I can tell people why people would do that, and why it's a legitimate form of migration. But even to someone who's like, the law is the law, like, that's it. Well, claiming asylum is a legal process. And what was, perpetrated on these people was just cruelty, for me, in the largest form, to just take someone's child and then, not just take them, but then give them no information, and then for some people deport them back, and their kid is just, in limbo somewhere and you have no idea where they are. So that was super emotional.
It's the highest
for me,
form
like,
of cruelty.
Yeah.
And I just saw this today as well, because it was just announced, but after a lot of criticism, but Biden finally lifted the Trump refugee cap after he received a lot of backlash from a couple days ago when he said that, oh no, we're not going to be lifting this. So they are raising the refugee cap to 62,500 people now, which is like, it's still such, and like, it sounds like a lot, but that's not a lot. Like, I'm pretty sure like my high school served more students than that. Like,
yeah.
And so
look, we're go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, I'm just like, it's just, it sounds like I don't think people realize the amount of people that need help in Central and South America, because it's just, it's like, I love visiting Guatemala and I love my family there, but there is a lot of stuff that goes on there that a lot of people are trying to escape. And that is at the hands of the US history that helped manipulate these things. So it's, I have a lot of feelings about illegal immigration and the entire book. So I actually had to stop myself from crying when I was reading your book, because I couldn't help but think of my mom, my dad, and my parents, and like what would have happened if my mother had brought my older sister with her in this time period and stuff like that. And like how when she heard about it, she was just so like, no, like she was just like, I would never have gone, like I would never have made the trip to the US if I had heard about that. And then, but that's is so cruel thinking about it, because that is exactly, as you said, that the intended effects of this policy, where she would have rather stayed and suffered where she was than look for, help, which is, or try to find a better life for herself, which is really, it's so cool. It's like, even thinking about it makes me so angry.
I love that we hear all the chatterings of the immigrants that are in your right now.
Yes, it's a very noisy household.
Welcome to Latinx culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just even in the first 3 pages of your comic, like I noticed that they traveled on La Bestia, which I know a lot of people who traveled on there, and I've heard the stories how people tie themselves with their own like belts to not fall off. And I wondered, I'm like, well, why do they need to tie themselves? And one of the reasons why is like the journey is so long and so hard that they might fall asleep on there and roll off, which is what causes a lot of people to actually die on their journey, or having limbs amputated because they fall in the it's just horrific stories. And just seeing that, I had a question. Are you guys are thinking about publishing this in Spanish?
I would love to. A few people have asked me that already. Yeah, I would love to publish in Spanish. I'd also love to do a version where the English dialogue is in English and the Spanish dialogue is in Spanish. You know, right now there's no like there's been no discussions with any publishers. I know that Image is like, I guess, soliciting that from publishers that they work with. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure that most of them are Spanish publishers, are publishers in Spain, that would be doing this. So, you know, it's a little different, but I would love to, you know, and hopefully they'll be able to figure something out with that, because I would love to see an edition in Spanish.
I just had an idea, because you know how we were talking about Dragon Ball and how they would send over the VHS copies, and then the guy at the shop would translate them and have the subtitles. So I'm like thinking, should I do a little like
a fan sub?
yeah.
Do it.
Yeah. No, but I mean, it's just yeah, it's really deep, really deep. I'm really enjoying it, and I'm glad I have it on my pull list.
Thank you.
I just want to echo the sentiment that both Sarah and Jen have shared so far, just about the emotional impact that reading this story so far, just in issue 1, had on me, and probably is having on all the readers that picked up this book. The portrayal of what these people went through, are going through, it just, the big panel that just had me like also almost in tears is when they came and literally grabbed the baby who was breastfeeding from its mom. And that was just so like heart-wrenching to even just, it's a comic, but just to see it portrayed and to know that that kind of thing happened was just horrific. And now I'm getting emotional.
I know, and I'm like, please don't call on me, because I think I'm gonna.
Well, I'll just, I'll say that, like, everything that's in the book, with the exception of, the fantasy, the superhuman moments, all of that is real.
Darn it, that's not real.
All of that is based. So, and it's all based off of like my research. So like that moment, that's a real thing that happened, a mother breastfeeding and them not even letting her finish breastfeeding, and taking the child. So like, sometimes I wonder, like, if people read it and they think that this is like some weird, like, like trying to make it emotional, like, this like weird, like emotional porn kind of thing. But like, everything that I put into the book is real, and like, it's not like there obviously is a purpose to writing this book. Like, I wanted to like reflect the times and kind of like hold this up to people, because it's hard for me to understand people who don't like pay attention enough to know that these things happened. But that's also a part of like the privilege that a lot of people have, to like be able to just zone that out and ignore it because it doesn't affect them. And it doesn't, remind them anything about their family's history. But part of this was, and one of the reasons why I made it a mini series rather than a graphic novel, was to kind of speak to the people who read comics in the direct market, and kind of try to use this group, this audience, and show them like, hey, this is what it was like, are you okay with this? And make them think, maybe for the first time, because they're empathizing with these characters, hopefully, like, hey, maybe this was wrong. Maybe I didn't pay attention to this. Maybe I should have been outraged when this was happening. And not just to make people feel guilty, but for when something like this inevitably happens again, maybe this will be something that people remember. And, maybe it, changes their mind. And that's probably my like optimistic version of like, a best case scenario. But yeah, like things like that, it wasn't put in just to like get an emotional response out of people. Like, I wanted to show the reality of what happened, based off of just research, like who knows the things that we'll never find out about. that happened in these places, you know?
Yeah.
So you're talking a little bit about wanting to get these stories in front of people and wanting to share and try to get people to empathize. As an actual Latino growing up in Latinx communities, did you feel a responsibility to get these stories out there in front of a wider audience?
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you look back at any of the prior to Home, everything that I've released have just been like mini comics that I put on my website for free that anybody can read. But if you read any of those, like there is a common thread through all of them, and that is, you know, using different Latino experiences and how they relate to, you know, being an American in this country. And so like to answer your question, I personally feel a responsibility. But I also almost want to like mention that's a responsibility that I personally feel. And I don't want to ever either put that on any other Latinx creator or make any other Latinx creator feel like they should be telling these kinds of stories. Because we don't put that on white creators. You know, we only put that on, you know, creators of color, minority creators. And it's a responsibility that I feel. You know, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but there's a Nina Simone quote that I really feel deeply when it comes to making art and to writing, which is that art should be a reflection of our times. And that I'll personally feel like I'm wasting my time and not contributing anything positive if I'm writing, you know, something that's purely meant for entertainment. Like that's just not something that I'm interested in. But at the same time, I don't want to, you know, I don't want anybody to hear me and think like that it's a criticism on other Latinx creators who aren't doing this kind of work, because it is exhausting work. And it is, you know, like, you know, you guys are talking about how emotional it was for you to read it and how, you know, you may have cried reading it. Like it was so emotional creating it also, you know, and like I had to stop, and like I like listening to interviews and doing the research, like I was crying. Like it was a really tough thing for me. So I don't, you know, I don't ever want people to think that I think that if you're, you know, some sort of minority creator, that you should also be focusing purely on like the trauma that's inflicted on your specific group. But yeah, but I personally do feel that responsibility, especially because it's unfortunately so rare in comics. You know, like getting a publisher to put out this book was, you know, I'm a first-time creator, obviously, so like there's that barrier of entry. But then to tell this story also, it was really difficult to, you know, eventually get to Image and publish it. You know, this wasn't like a situation where like I asked Image and they were like, cool, let's do it. Like it was difficult to like get our pitch in front of Image in the first place. And everybody else had said no to it before that, you know, like I feel like obviously Image is the biggest creator-owned publisher, and that's what most people aspire to. And I feel like if you're like a top tier creator, like you go straight to Image, and if they don't say yes, then maybe you go to the next one. But for me, like they were like my last shot, you know, and you know, I'm really lucky that it worked out with them, because otherwise this book wouldn't have ever been published.
Yeah.
Wow, that's super amazing. Whoa, it feels a little bit heavy. Like,
Yeah.
like I mean, just the whole weight of it all. I mean, I just intense, very intense. Let's give the creative team behind Home a little some love. Tell us more about tell us more about how the partnership of the team happened. What are some of the ways the rest of the team helped to bring the story to life, and kind of what you expected the story to unfold?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's you know, it's, I feel like every part of the creation of this book was like unconventional by like normal standards of creator-owned comics. So I found Anna's the artist, Anna Weisscheck. Brian Valenza is the colorist, and Hassan Otsmain Allah, who is the letterer, and Lisa Stroll did the covers. So like I said, home was what kind of got me to start writing comics. And this was the story that I wanted to, that I taught myself how to write comics, and figured out like how the industry works with the purpose of putting out this book. And before this book, obviously I put out all these mini comics that I did kind of in the interim to like build a profile a little bit and show publishers that like I could put out a comic, like I could write a comic. But throughout it all, it was all in service of doing the home. So I found Anna on Reddit, actually, which I don't think that's like a normal story for like image books. But there's a subreddit called comic book collaborations or comic book collabs, where pretty much like you just like write up a listing, you know, it's almost like a job listing. It's like, I need an artist for this kind of story in this kind of style. This is how long the book is, like, is anybody interested? And that was kind of like my first, and I put like a brief, kind of like what's in the solicitation for the first issue was like the brief description that I put in. And that was like my first like interaction with like the backlash that the book would end up getting from some corners of the internet, was in that Reddit post. But I also got really lucky that Anna responded, and she was like, hey, I'm really interested. Here's my like my samples from past work. Like, do you want to work on this together? And I think she might have been like maybe one of 2 or 3 people that reached out. The rest of it was like pretty negative, the comments on it.
Are you serious?
Hey, good thing you broke in through fucking Reddit first.
Yeah.
Because like, hey, if you survive Reddit, you're fine. You're golden.
I know.
Critics in the world will drag you as much as Reddit can. So
Yeah.
I mean,
but yeah,
I'm honestly,
and I was.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I said, I'm honestly like I'm honestly surprised that that like Reddit didn't discourage you, because like Reddit is like, even the subreddits can be like really harsh.
Yeah, I mean, like this whole putting out, like, I'll get back to the artist in a second, but like putting out this book, like every part of it was like filled with moments that were really discouraging. You know, like just the difficulty of like building a creative team when like you're nobody, you know, like I didn't have like, this is before I even put out the mini comics. So like I was literally just like shooting into the dark. And then, you know, like trying to find a publisher and then putting it out. And like, I would say 99% of the response from people that like actually read it has been super positive. But like, you know, we all know about the kinds of people that are also unfortunately, you know, in like the fandom of comics that don't want any politics in their comics, don't want any, you know, diversity in their comics, even if it's creator owned. You know, I feel like usually the criticism is like, we don't want you like race bending or gender bending our characters, but you know, some of these people have come out pretty strong against this book also, when it's like an original story. That's not like changing any previous IP. So, but I do feel like that experience on Reddit kind of like, you know, opened my eyes to like, do I want to do this? Because if I do, I know that there is going to be, you know, a part of like the comic fandom that is going to have a negative reaction to it. So yeah, so it was, luckily I found Anna, and she was great. You know, it was, like, I think the fact that I found somebody on Reddit that was at the caliber that could be published on Image, you know, like I think is like a miracle in itself.
Yeah.
But also to find Anna, you know, who like I don't know what you guys think reading it, but I felt like her like the way that she was able to like make these characters act and like feel the emotions was super powerful, and like one of the best, my favorite things about her art. But I think also like, you know, a lot of people have like, there's been a conversation that's kind of sprung from this about like, you know, how serious the art should be to like the tone of what the book is. But for me, I think that her art that's like more stylized, you know, not like gritty the way, and, you know, dark like the way that the story can be, is like a good counterbalance, and was kind of what I was looking at, that you know, a lot of people have told me that they like in the really difficult moments, the art is what allowed them to like keep going, because it wasn't like as heavy and as dark as like the content of the story. So I felt really lucky to find her. And then Hassan, I worked with him on all of those mini comics. So by the time I was ready to find a letterer, I'd already been working with him. And I found him through his YouTube videos. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but he has a channel called Strip Panel Naked, where he kind of just like dissects comics. And it's a really great channel. I'd recommend anybody to check out. Cool. And then Brian, I think, was just a recommendation on Twitter. I think I posted something about like, hey, I need a colorist, and somebody recommended him. And that was pretty much how we built the team. So I was pretty lucky to kind of like land on all of these people who are just like amazing creators. And that, you know, I was able to put together this book that was like at the caliber that it needed to be for a publisher like Image to pick up. You know, so like that's all on them, you know, because I could write, you know, a script and it's, you know, nobody's going to publish a script. So, you know, I was really lucky to find them.
Yeah. No, what I find incredible about all of this is that you found most of these people online. Like that's, I don't think a lot of people realize that a lot of the industry is very kind of person to person. You have to know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And that's how a lot of creative projects get done and stuff like that. So the fact that you were able to kind of like shoot into the darkness of the web and find somebody, it's incredible. And honestly, like kudos to you for going through all that effort to put this book out there, because I think it's a very important book that needs to be put out. And I really like, I almost can't tell that this was done by a new creator or a new writer at all. There's we've criticized a lot of new comic books where
she means her.
usually it's me, but your dialogue was very well paced. I'm honestly like, I was really astounded with it, because what we've seen happen a lot in new comics and new people coming into comics is they're very wordy. They're very like I'm gonna put my entire dissertation into this comic book, whereas you didn't. And I think you did a great job of humanizing the dialogue as well. I honestly think that if I had read the words that were supposed to be in Spanish, I would have put the book halfway down and just cried.
Yeah, like, I agree.
And so, and the artwork is absolutely fits the book as well. I don't really, I know what you mean about like, I personally don't really like the super dark grim artwork, but I tend to like more kind of like stylized artwork. So the fact that this was the fact that this was very stylized, I think one made it easier to consume and made it more comic booky in my eyes. But it's also Anna did an amazing job portraying emotion, because it did really work. I feel like sometimes when you stick too close to like kind of grim dark artwork, it's very hard to convey human emotion the way that stylized art is just better at doing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously this isn't a book where like, you know, until the end where like big, huge like set pieces happen in it. So I knew that like it would be really important to just like capture the emotions. And you know, like I said, like it's not like I had a lot of options when I started putting together the team for this book. But that's something that really struck me about her art. And I just felt like super lucky that you know, she possessed like that quality that I thought would be like one of the most important things about the art for that book. But yeah, and you know, like for me, like I've been reading comics for a long time. I almost, you know, I don't think I've talked about this anywhere, but like I feel like I feel lucky that I started writing comics when I did, and that I didn't start, you know, like putting out, trying to write comics or putting out any work when I was like, you know, 18 or 20, or like when I was younger, because I feel like I've come into this like with more experience, and also with almost, you know, I don't want to say like a worldview that I didn't possess when I was 18 or 20, but something that's like evolved a lot, like I mentioned, like leaving Miami and kind of starting to like think a lot more deeply about my culture and my history. um and you know, like frankly, like let go of a lot of like the self-hate that I like had when I was younger. And that I think that's part of the writing also, you know. So like I think that a lot of times when we see new writers that maybe are like a lot wordier, it's also that they're just like younger, you know, and like they don't have a lot of that experience. And like, you know, not that I'm like, you know, that old or anything, but I do feel like I did you know, I had, even if it's just more time reading comics and just enjoying comics for like just the enjoyment of it, like I did come into it with more of that experience, at least. Also,
That's awesome.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and take her question.
So thank you for that. But now we are going to be moving on to Chisme. And so this segment gives you the opportunity to share any stories, comics, projects that you are working on currently that you haven't shared. So we'd love to hear all about Frontera.
yeah. So Frontera is a book that I'm working on. I wrote it last year, essentially, like during the lockdown. And Jacoby Salcedo, my co-creator on it, he's illustrating it now. Jacoby is somebody that I'm really, you know, he's become like a best friend of mine. And we're super close. We work on a ton of projects together. I met him when I was doing those mini comics. And because I essentially like hired him to do The Price of Freedom, which is a 8-page mini comic. And then we just like kept working together from there on, and we did 2 more mini comics, and now we're doing Frontera. Um, and Frontera is a book. It's a book about a 16-year-old boy who goes on a journey across the Sonoran Desert to go back home to Arizona after previously being deported. And you know, this book is it's very different from Home, even though it kind of you know, obviously talks about immigration. But while he's in the desert, this is a book that's more like magical realism focused. He meets a ghost, and it's the ghost of a migrant that had passed away half a century earlier in the same desert. And the book kind of deals with the parallels of their lives. And while Mateo, the main character, the 16-year-old boy, is you know, is a boy who him and his family were deported, and he's trying to make it back home. Guillermo, the ghost, he was the bracero, so who was also deported once his time was up, essentially, and then tried to make it back to the U.S. So it speaks to like the parallels of immigration 50 years apart, and how situations might be totally different now in the way that you know, the desert is patrolled and enforced with technology now, but their situations are very similar, and the outcome is also very similar, even if the policies are different. And that's a YA book. So while Home is kind of like, you know, I would say like teen and up, but it's written, you know, mostly for adults, I would say. Frontera is a book that's written for the YA audience. And it's being published by Harper Alley, which is HarperCollins's YA division. So that's a book we're both really excited about. Like I said, it's very different from Home. You know, I feel like after the first issue, at least, of Home, you don't see it yet, but you know, there are moments of joy in Home. But Frontera is a book with, I think, a lot more of that. and it's also, you know, it's a 236-page graphic novel.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, we have a lot more room to work with. And it's, yeah, and it's something that I'm really excited for people to eventually read. You know, the book market is very, very different than the comic market. Like I said, I wrote this last year. Now he's illustrating it, and it'll be out in 2023. Whereas Home, I just today actually got the last page of the last issue for Home.
Oh,
And
wow.
that'll be
Wow.
out.
Wow.
That'll wrap up in August. So like it's a very different
Yeah.
process. But yeah, so we're really excited for Frontera too.
Julio, I can already tell you're going to make me cry all over again with Frontera. So, and also 2023 seems like so far away. We have to wait.
I know. Hopefully we'll have something else in between that time.
Awesome.
But you know, a little too early to talk about that.
That's the real cheese man right there.
Yeah. I'll say that it's also a book that Jacoby and I are working on. That'll be for the comics market.
Nice.
So I think it'll come out in 2022. And it'll be a much more cathartic book, I think. And a violent book as well. Based off of a historical figure that I think all of us might know who he is, but most Americans probably don't know about him. But yeah, I guess that's what we'll say about it.
We're ripping it out of him. So we
Interesting.
also. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So I was gonna say interesting. I already have some figures in mind that fit that description. So we'll see.
So we also have a segment on our podcast called Juntus Fuertes, and that segment highlights noteworthy endeavors by members of marginalized groups that we think really deserve their voices to be lifted up. So do you have any projects or programs that you would like to plug in this segment?
Yeah, sure. So you guys all know Henry, right?
Yes.
You guys have had Henry on.
Yes.
So Henry is a big part of why my book was published by Image. So definitely want to shout out Helm Greycastle. So I have the Kickstarter version of it here.
Oh, that's a nice cover. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it just came out. It came out last Wednesday.
Yes.
I'll also shout out his artist partner on La Voz de Mayo,
Gonzo.
So he has his luchador book, La Mano del Destino. I believe that comes out the same day that Home #2 comes out, which is May 19th, also from Image. So definitely recommend that. Also recommend this book, The Black Panther Party.
Yeah,
we reviewed that.
Novel.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, so love it. Love it. Love it.
Yeah, it's a great book. I have all these little Post-it tabs in it because I think when is this video going up?
Probably in the next couple of days.
Okay, so by that point, I have a nonfiction book that's about to be announced. Nonfiction graphic novel. So I've been using this book kind of like, you know, like, oh, I really like this page. Like, I want to do something like that page. So I'm just starting to write that book, which will come out at the end of 2023. And this book is The Black Panther Party has been like a big inspiration for like how I'm telling the story in this new book. So I definitely recommend that. Trying to think of anything else off the top of my head. Yeah, I definitely recommend Henry and Gonzo's book. Definitely pick that up. He introduced me to the editor that put me in touch with Eric Stevenson at Image.
Nice.
So I owe a lot to meeting him, doing a panel with him at New York Comic Con, and kind of like that's why Home exists now.
That's awesome.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Henry was our very, very, very first guest on Las Platicas when we first instilled this new portion of our. It was before it was even video; it was just audio at the time, and he was our very first guest. But check out
Yeah.
Julio, who has just released his debut comic, telling us, yeah, I have this comic coming, and I have this graphic novel coming, and I'm working on this too. You are killing it, sir.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Thank you.
That is super cool. Where can our listeners find you? Or in this case, where can the audience find you and your future projects, website, social media? When
Yeah.
does the next issue? I know you mentioned I think the date of the second issue coming out
Yeah.
in the stands, and plug away.
Yeah. So Julio Anta, just everywhere. Twitter, Instagram. My website is also julioanta.com. You can read all those mini comics I keep mentioning. They're free, they're just quick little stories about things that, make me angry, essentially. It's most of my books. But yeah, and there you'll find links to all of my future stuff. There's a little preview to Frontera there. There will be a preview to this new book that's going to be announced hopefully this week. Links to buy home. I'll just show this really quick. I just got the reprint version of Home #1.
Nice.
That's awesome.
In today, actually. So, through a lot of support from, shops, the first pressing sold out already, and they image reprinted it. So that's coming out May 12th, which is a week from Wednesday. And then the following week, May 19th, will be Home #2. So if you haven't read it yet, you can pick up the reprint. I know that the first pressing is still floating around at some shops. And then the second issue is going to be May 19th.
Absolutely.
You can pick them up at Heidi Ho Comics in Santa Monica, California.
There we go.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that, really show support for this comic book by ordering at your local comic book shop. That doesn't necessarily have to be Heidi Ho Comics, but just like anywhere that, your support local businesses, support your local comic book shop. Add Home to your pull list so they can order it in advance from Diamond, so that you can get your very own copy of this comic book. It's a 5-issue series, correct?
Yeah, it's a 5-issue miniseries. And I'll just say this one last thing, not because I want everybody to buy my comic and support it and everything, but I do think it's important for us to support, books like this, Henry's books, Gonzo's books, and show these publishers that, that there is a market for these Latinx books, because I think, like I said, I never saw myself in, much media, and especially in comics. And it's important, one of the big things is showing them that it makes economic sense to put out these books, because most people aren't just going to put out books because of the goodness of their heart. They're going to do it because it makes them money too. So I think we need to show support to these kinds of books. Like I said, not just mine. It's not a pitch to buy my book, but support Henry's book, support Gonzo's book, support every Latinx creator who's putting out comics. Because I think that's super important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, put your money where your mouth is, people.
Exactly. Don't forget to add it to your pull list at your local comic book shop. Well, it's been an awesome pleasure. This kind of story is very close to home for me. There's a lot of people that I know that immigrated to the United States illegally, and I thought I knew a lot, but reading your book just shines a different perspective on stories that I've already heard. So thank you so much for writing it. Thank you so much for taking a hit for all of us and doing all the research that'll make me cry in a corner for hours. So thank you so much for being on Las Platicas today. We're really happy to have had you, and if there's an open invitation, if any other future projects, I know you're working on a lot of stuff, so you're more than welcome to come back on the show and tell us all about it.
Thank you.
So with that, this concludes our Las Platicas episode. We have been your hosts. I'm Sarah.
I'm Kristen.
And I'm Jen.
And Julio Anta.
Thank you so much for having me. Gracias.
Gracias a ti. Y don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. Goodbye.
Bye.